Thank you, Joan and Kim, for organizing this wonderful luncheon, and the Geyer and Dickinson families for supporting Pines to the extent you have. I am so excited about the beauty salon because I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and there sits my mother with the hairdryer on books, and she's in a wheelchair, and it's not the way you want to enjoy an experience at the beauty parlor. So thank you so much for that. I really do want to express my appreciation to everyone in this room for coming today in support of Pines of Sarasota. During the 35 years that I've lived in Sarasota, I have always admired the work that has been done at Pines. But that admiration, as Joan said, has evolved to deep gratitude since my mother became a resident there 2.5 years ago. Few decisions are as difficult as deciding that you are unable to care for a loved one at home. And I don't think I will ever get over having to make that decision. But every time I leave Mother after visiting her at the Pines, I have the confidence that I'm leaving her in the best of hands, and there is no greater gift than that. But the real wonderment of Pines is that it cares for people who have outlived their money with the same love and devotion as it cares for the people who can still afford to pay their way. 75% of the people at the Pines are on Medicaid. That is really incredible. And that Medicaid has been cut by $750,000 this year. That's also incredible and scary. So you all are going to make it possible for that wonderment to go on because of your contributions. So thank you so much. And today you're in for a real treat. The Wit and Wisdom of Aging Committee has assembled an amazing panel, and I cannot wait for you to meet them. I will tell you in advance that these remarkable people share some common themes: lives they consider to be blessed, reinvention after extraordinary careers, the pain of watching a loved one struggle with dementia, and exceptional wit and wisdom. I also think you'll be surprised to learn who is a circus clown, who has the most extravagant jewelry, and who spends a great deal of time in a director's chair. I will ask them to come to the dais individually as I introduce them. Most of you know Duran Adams as Judge Duran Adams. He sat on the 12th Judicial Circuit bench for 25 years, retiring in 2010. As circuit judge, he was a moving force behind the creation of an integrated family law division, well before the rest of Florida began to move in that direction. He was appointed by the Florida Supreme Court to head the Florida Court Steering Committee and received numerous awards for his work in the judicial system, especially with regard to issues concerning children and victims' rights. What you may not know is that Duran traded his judicial career for one as a filmmaker. He and Judge Charles Williams, who is here today, are now producing their 4th documentary, this one on memory. Their prior film, Through the Tunnel, chronicled the effects of integration at Lincoln Memorial High School in Palmetto. It won significant acclaim, garnering the grand prize for Best Historical Documentary at the 2010 Doc Miami International Film Festival. And as I was just telling Judge Williams, it made me cry, so I highly recommend it. It's very, very moving. Duran is a native of Tampa and lives in Palmetto with his wife, Carol. When he retired from the bench in 2009, he made a conscious decision to devote the rest of his life to matters unconnected with the formal practice of law. He now spends time with Carol, their 2 grown sons and grandchildren, and tends to his golf game. And of course, he plans to continue producing documentaries. Judge Duran Adams. Virginia Daly is a 4th-generation Washingtonian whose father was the theater critic for the Washington Post. She began her career in New York City as an ad director for Doubleday and later founded her own marketing firm, which she led for 30 years before retiring in 2006. Her clients included the National Geographic Society, Smithsonian Institution, Time Life Books, Peace Corps, Kennedy Center, and Metropolitan Museum. From 1992 to 2004, Jenny served as media spokesperson for the rapidly developing online industry, with clients that included Amazon, Crate & Barrel, and Dell. Her major achievement over this 12-year period was to help convince the American public of the many benefits that doing business online would bring. Each year, she conducted several hundred television interviews appearing on all of the major networks and cable channels. Chief among her achievements in public service is her early volunteer leadership with the Rails to Trails Conservancy, which is dedicated to converting abandoned railroad tracks to bicycle and hiking trails nationwide, and among them is our own Legacy Trail. She is widely published as a writer and as a popular speaker. She has biked hundreds of miles to raise thousands of dollars for worthy causes. And she regularly volunteers at hospitals and nursing homes as a clown after formal training by the Big Apple Circus. She is married to Pierce Quinlan, and for the last 9 years, she has persuaded him to join her as a clown in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Jenny Daly. Scotty Bowman is the winningest coach in the history of the National Hockey League, with 1,244 victories and 9 Stanley Cup bench wins. During his 27 years as a coach, he never had a losing record in any full season. He began coaching after a skull fracture in high school meant he could no longer play the game. When he began his career, he was the youngest coach in the league, and when he ended his career, he was the oldest. He has coached the Montreal Canadiens, St. Louis Blues, Buffalo Sabres, Pittsburgh Penguins, and Detroit Red Wings. In 1995-96, the Red Wings won an NHL record 62 games, eclipsing the previous record of 60, which Scotty had set with Montreal 20 years earlier. He earned a permanent place in the hearts of Red Wing fans in 1997 by leading the team to its first Stanley Cup win in 42 years. The following year, he guided Detroit to a repeat championship. In 2002, he decided that he would retire, and I will let him tell you about that decision. His hockey fairy tale would finish with a storybook ending when his Red Wings won the Cup in dominating fashion, defeating the Carolina Hurricanes in 5 games. Today, Scotty is a senior advisor for the Chicago Blackhawks and close follower of the Tampa Bay Lightning. He and his wife, Suella, have 5 children and 6 grandchildren, and they split their time between Buffalo and Sarasota. Please welcome our 3 wonderful panelists. Scotty, I'm going to start with you. But before I do, would you please show everybody that championship ring? Get a load of this. That's as big as my Coast Infinity. Scotty, you coached in 5 different decades, and as I mentioned, you started as the youngest coach in the league and you retired as the oldest coach in the league. Tell us what changed in that period of time.
Well, the biggest change when I started coaching in 1967, most of the players couldn't afford cars. They got loaner cars from the owners. They generally had brush cuts. They didn't have any agents. And when I retired in 2002, they drove Ferraris and Lamborghinis. They had agents, and some of them even had earrings. But I had a lot of fun. It was a great ride, and I'm enjoying myself now. My son is the general manager of the Chicago Blackhawks, so I get to work for my son. And we've got some Blackhawk fans here, so we were fortunate to win the Cup in 2010, and that's the ring that I'm wearing.
Scotty, before I move on, tell us about your decision to retire, why you made it, and about the night that you retired.
It was a tough decision because I was wondering for up to the 5 years before that, when should I retire, and I never felt really comfortable until 2002 was an Olympic year, and we had a 10-day break in February. I took my family to Orlando, and we spent about 7 days there, and we got ready to resume our season in February, and I said, this is a pretty good idea. And I made up my mind at that time that this was going to be my last job. And fortunately, as a coach, we generally lose our last game and then get fired. But I feel like Tony La Russa now, he won his last game and he decided to retire. And I just felt that it was the right thing to do. And I decided when we were going to win the fourth game that it would be fun to put on my skates and carry the cup around. So I put my skates on with a couple of minutes to go. We took a bit of a chance. We had a 2-goal lead. And I put my skates on and I skated with that cup. And that was the biggest thrill I ever had.
Thank you, Scotty. Jenny, you're a trailblazer in so many ways. You started your own business in marketing at a time when there weren't a lot of women in the upper echelons of the marketing and advertising industry. You were the first woman chair of Rails to Trails. You were twice president of the American News Women's Association, which was actually formed because women were not allowed in the National Press Club. But you told me that you always liked to play on the boys' side of the playground. What do you mean by that and why?
Well, growing up, as I did, I was blessed to come from a big family. There were 5 girls and 2 boys, and so I didn't know there were limits. And as I looked around the playground, and the girls were playing jacks and jump rope, and the boys were playing basketball and baseball, I mean, there's sort of no question, I think. And I didn't see why I couldn't play with the boys because they were having more fun. And I really was lucky in that I had an education that lent toward leadership. And I never saw any barriers. My great aunt was the 3rd woman to graduate from Columbia Medical School. And she'd grown up in Iowa, of all places. So that sort of set the standard. And my mother was a nationally syndicated columnist. So I didn't see why women couldn't do anything they wanted. And I think because of my background, I've learned to look at things differently. And once you do that, there aren't any limits, whether it's the schoolroom or the boardroom or whatever. And so I don't see any problem. And I realized after I've met Duran and Scotty that I'm between one man who wore long flowing robes to work every day and another man who's got so much bling, we need a walking tour of it. So.
You know, perhaps your greatest feat of trailblazing had nothing to do with gender. It was as spokeswoman for the internet. Starting before many of us were even all that familiar with the internet. And of course, it would go on to become ubiquitous and affect every aspect of American life. At the time you started doing this, did you have a sense that it would become such a profound influence over our society?
Well, it was interesting when it started. I came from a marketing background, and of course the goal there is to reach as many people as possible, but people that you really want to sell your product or service to. And my specialty is direct marketing. And so the internet spoke to that. And I was very excited, and I could see the possibility of it, and I was thrilled to be able to educate America on the value of going online, whether it was shopping or doing business or whatever. That was pretty terrific. What I didn't have the vision for is what Steve Jobs could see, and the now social media. But for the 12 years that I was traveling the country, educating America about being online, every year I could see the increase and the value of Google, Amazon, what we can do, and really creating a global village. I think that's terrific. I maybe didn't have the vision of the founder of the internet, Al Gore, but but I had a good time with the internet.
Thank you, Jenny. Duran, you and your 3 sisters were raised by a single mother in Tampa. You know, financial challenges certainly were prevalent in your early years, and yet you say that your childhood was blessed. Why do you say that?
Well, before I get to that, I want to say that being on this stage with Diane McFarland, a woman who has a national reputation for excellence in journalism, and Ginny Daly and Scotty Bowman, two legendary people in their own right, makes me feel like I've finally made it to the Supreme Court. Now, I grew up in a family in the 50s with a single parent. Because of circumstances of life, I didn't have a father after the age of 9. That was not a disadvantage, as it turned out, in my life because of my mother. My mother was an extraordinary human being who led by love and example, and who had the best sense of humor I've ever known in my life. The other thing that she instilled in her children was this sense of excellence. Nothing else was acceptable. My older sister was one of 3 female students at the University of Miami Medical School. She graduated from medical school and became a cardiologist, one of the first female cardiologists in the state of Florida, and went on to have a spectacular career in medicine. I went to, well, because my sister had gone to medical school, I had to go to law school. And I went to law school. I wasn't going to follow the brilliance of my sister. I went to law school and became a lawyer, and then spent 25 years as a trial judge here in this circuit. All of this was as a result of the influence that my mother had in our lives.
Thank you. You know, it's not often that a judicial career evolves into a filmmaking career, so you have to tell us how that happened.
It's pretty simple, really. I was a trial judge for 25 years, and for those of you who are not familiar with what judges do, we divide the living, and it's a wonderful career. But I will tell you that it comes with you feel the stress every day of your life. It is something that's unrelenting, and it never subsides. So I know we have other judges here in this room today, and I will tell you for them that they do just an absolutely wonderful job. Now, when I retired, I felt, honestly, though I loved my career, I felt as though a physical weight had been taken off of me. And so I wanted to do something entirely different than being involved with the practice of law or the legal system for the rest of my life. I became an accidental filmmaker, and I'll describe that in a little bit more detail later. But it was just a confluence of circumstances that involved Judge Williams, who's here, and I, and Charles Clapsaddle from METV, being involved in a series of projects, one leading to another, and we are now working on our 4th documentary movie.
That's great, thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, Through the Tunnel is just phenomenal. Be sure to see it.
By the way, I want to tell you what a unbelievably almost out-of-body experience it was when we went to the Doc Miami International Film Festival with that documentary. And at the end of the festival, they had kind of like something that was you've seen the Academy Awards, and they announced the the winners of all of the awards. We didn't even know we were nominated in the category of Best Historical Documentary until they announced at that formal dinner that we had won. I turned to my wife and I said, "This is crazy." And it was.
It was well deserved. Well deserved. Scotty, I was so struck, the formal bio that I was given for you described you as a master of motivation and mind games. You have to tell us all about that. What's your secret?
Well, Diane, I was fortunate. I grew up in Montreal, and it was the hockey hotbed when I was living there, and I got an opportunity with expansion. The league expanded from 6 teams to 12, and I went to the St. Louis Blues, and that was quite an experience because when I got there, I was warned by the manager that, obviously these are not hockey fans. It's the first time they've had a team. And one of the strangest things that ever happened to me, actually, I met my wife in St. Louis. She was a nurse, and she was a basketball fan, never saw hockey, and she had the first dilemma, really, that happened to me. In hockey in those days, we had ties, and I was a tough loser, and I probably still am, and I said, if we lose the game, just go home and I'll give you a call, and if we win, you can wait. And one night, we had the thing, we tied. So she didn't know what to do. But she waited around, and of course it was the best thing happened to me. But Diane, the strangest thing happened to me. One of our early games, we were struggling to win games, and we didn't have any glass or any screen behind the bench. I was in St. Louis, remembering what the manager had told me. These are new fans, and there was 5 minutes to go in the game, and we were down a goal. Wins and ties were hard to get. And I heard this young lady behind the bench say, "Why doesn't the stupid coach take out the goalie?" So I looked at the clock, there was 5 minutes left, and I heard the same thing, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Finally, with a minute to go, I took out the goalie. We were playing the Detroit Red Wings. We were down 3-2. The great Gordie Howe was still playing. He got the puck in front of his own net, and he put it over everybody's head, put it in our net, and of course it's 4-2, the game's over. I'm upset, and I tried to look around and give her a dirty look, and she said, "I told you he was a stupid coach. I didn't mean our goalie, I meant their goalie." and that actually happened to me. So, so I didn't, as far as I think what I was, Diane, I was always inquisitive. I always asked a lot of questions, and I guess my players said I was unpredictable. And one of them quoted and said, "For 364 days a year, we hated him, but on the 365th day when we got our bonus, he was okay."
Thank you, Scotty. Jenny, tell us about your love of the circus, your Ringling connection, how that love came about, and how you carry it forward today.
Well, it's pretty nifty being here in Ringling territory. When I was growing up, my father was as Diane mentioned, he was drama critic of the Washington Post. And the fellow who did public relations for Ringling was named Frank Braden, and he would have the drama critic of the Post cover the circus, because he thought that was kind of a cute gimmick. And so he became very good friends with the Daly family. And when we were growing up, as I mentioned, there were many of us. And so Frank Braden would give us tickets to the circus, all of us. And we could go for as many performances as we wanted, and we could bring all our friends and all the neighborhood kids. So as you can imagine, Mr. Braden was one of our favorite family friends. And I grew to love the circus because I went many, many times each time it came to town. And I met Emmett Kelly, and he would sweep under my feet, stayed in clown, as we say. And that started my love of the circus. And then, to show the influence of one man on a family and following generations, Mr. Frank Braden got sick, I think it was pneumonia, and my father told him I would be praying for him, which indeed I did. And when he got better, he sent me a telegram. I was 5 years old, and I still have the telegram to this day, because that's a big deal back in the 50s for a 5-year-old to get a telegram. And it said, "Jenny, your prayers have made me well. Keep up your singing and dancing, and you will always have a job with the circus." And at 5 years old, I believed him. So I've always kept up my singing and dancing. And then later, after I moved to New York, and I saw that the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, friends of mine had been balloon handlers, and I met somebody who had a connection to Macy's, which is how you get to be in the parade. somebody who knew the president of Macy's, matter of fact. And so I said, boy, I really want to be in the parade. And I started out as a balloon handler. But I saw that the clowns had much more fun because they could go over and mix it up with the people, toss confetti and all that. So promoted myself to clown, which I've done ever since. And then after my husband got sick and I was spending a lot of time in nursing homes, in the nursing home, and when I retired and had some time, I thought, now what can I do to take what I know and do community give back? And I've been on boards of directors and all that wonderful, what we all do. But I wanted something a little more hands-on. So I took the care and compassion training that the Big Apple Circus offers for hospital clowns as well. And so I've been doing hospital clowning. So besides the hospital clowning, I also take my entire clan to the Ringling Brothers when it comes to Washington every year. So clowning, circuses, I'm all about that.
And I understand you did a little bit of that at the Pines yesterday.
I did some clowning yesterday.
Thank you. We've talked about Through the Tunnel, the documentary that Duran did with Charles and Charles. And it's about the effect that integration had on an all-black high school in the 60s, Lincoln Memorial High School in Palmetto. And you grew up in a very segregated environment in Tampa, and because of that, the experience of producing that documentary had a profound effect on you personally. Would you talk about that?
Sure, but can I do something? Can I set the record straight on something else while I'm here? Take this opportunity. There are a lot of lawyers here in this group this afternoon, so I wanted to mention this. I know that I had a reputation as a judge for being sort of very thorough, and a lot of lawyers who would come to my courtroom and have hearings with me would walk away grumbling about, damn, that Judge Adams, he's such a nitpicker. Well, now you know that the reason I was like that was because of the impression my mother made with all of her children to pay attention to detail. So, all along, what you all should have been saying was, damn, Judge Adams' mom was such a nitpicker. All right, back to Through the Tunnel. And the way that I grew up. I grew up in Tampa, Florida, in the 50s and the 60s. For the first 17 years of my life, I lived in a completely segregated society. I lived in a segregated neighborhood. I went to segregated schools. I went to segregated churches. The stores I went to were all segregated. All the movies I saw in segregated movie theaters. That's the way life was like in the South, in Tampa, when I grew up. When I went away to college, I went away to college in Illinois at the age of 17. And when I was at college that fall, I experienced two firsts in my life. I saw snow, and I had a conversation with a black person. Now, one of the worst things about living in those days of segregation was that the weight of the state lay across the whole society in enforcing segregation. It was the law. That's something that, that has to profoundly affect anyone who lives in that kind of culture. And it affected me, even though I will say that I and all of my friends lived on the easy side of segregation. So when it came to the movie Through the Tunnel, which I really have to thank Charles Williams for being inspired enough to bring it to me and say, hey, we need to do something about this story, and Charles Clapsaddle and METV for giving us the opportunity to make the movie. When we did the movie, I was profoundly affected by what we discovered and the story that we told. And I will just say that one of the things that did profoundly affect me was when I was doing archival research, trying to find photographs of the kids who went to Lincoln Memorial High School, the only all-black high school in Manatee County at the time. I was affected by what I call the revelation of sameness. When you look at the photographs of those kids at Lincoln in the 60s, and I compare them, when you look at the faces, and when I compared them to the faces of the kids I went to school with, who were all white, there was a sameness in the faces. The only difference really was the color of the skin. All of those kids at Lincoln and all of the kids I went to school with had faces that were filled with hope and filled with dreams, and it was all the same.
Duran and Scotty, your mothers suffered with dementia, and Jenny, your brilliant husband, died of Alzheimer's. And I think it's relevant to our topic for today to talk some about that. And Duran, I'll start with you. If you describe to me what it was like to watch your mother decline with dementia, and I'd like for the folks in this room to hear that.
Well, eventually the most important person in the galaxy I grew up in, my mother, died of Alzheimer's. And it was and I had the experience of witnessing this, the progression of this disease, slowly at first and then a rapid decline. Now, you have to understand how quick-witted my mother was through most of her life. I got the first evidence of something being wrong when I was a judge, and I was in my chambers, and my judicial assistant told me that my mother was on the telephone, and she sounded disturbed. So, so I answered the phone, and my mom had a very frightened quality to her voice, and I said, "What's wrong, Mom?" And she said, "I'm lost. I don't know where I am." And she was living in Tampa at the time, and I was in Bradenton. And I said, "Well, Mother, calm down. Describe to me what you see, and then I'll call the police, and then they'll come and find you." And when she described to me what she saw, I realized it was her kitchen. And that was the beginning. And there was this inexorable decline. And eventually, it got to the point where even though my mother was still physically here, she was gone. And that's one of the horrible things about this affliction.
Was it Nancy Reagan who coined the term "the long goodbye"? I think that certainly is applicable. Scotty, you said there weren't good options like Pines for your dad, so he had to care for your mother at home, and I know that was difficult for you and your brothers and sisters to watch.
Diane, both my parents lived till the early 90s. My dad was 4 years older than my mother, but my mother was an avid card player. She was one of the best card players I ever saw or even tried to play with. And she actually taught me when she was in her prime. She would play cards, and she'd get mad and she'd throw the cards down and she'd say, "If you can't win, you better not play." And I think that's what I used to learn from her. But after I left coaching and I went on television for 3 years. One of the best experiences was I was able to go visit my hometown in Montreal, and I was a broadcaster and I was an analyst, and I would go visit my parents the day before a game, and my mother was suffering from dementia. My dad was in perfect health, and he chose to look after my mother for 3 years at home, And I would go, and my mother would know me, and she would say to me, "You're playing tonight?" And I'd say, "I am, Mom. Our team is playing." And she'd say, "You better win or I can't sleep tonight." So she still remembered me, and she still watched the games. My dad said she didn't really know at the end of the game what the result was, but I would go back the next week. And my dad looked after my mother for 3 years at home, and he became the real victim of it, because he was a great walker, and he had to take care of my mother at home. He was always fearful of my mother, what might happen to the house. So he was really her caretaker. I saw for 24 hours a day, and it lasted for 3 years. And he passed away at 94. My mother was actually older when she passed away.
Thank you, Scotty. Jenny, you made a valiant attempt to care for your husband at home, and that didn't work out. Tell us why and what happened.
Well, it didn't. My husband had the second biggest ad agency in Washington and had been a West Pointer, and so to see him start to lose it, he was a feisty guy. And once I recognized that it was Alzheimer's, and not the Irish Alzheimer's, which I'm sure you've all heard, Irish Alzheimer's where you forget everything but the grudges. He wasn't Irish, so he didn't have that. But what had happened was I was caring for him and also continuing doing my media work and with my ad agency. And the enormity of the care, even though I had someone living in to give him care full time, I didn't realize that I'd heard the phrase care for the caregiver, but it didn't really sink in. And it wasn't until 2 years later, after his Alzheimer's was in place for 2 years and we were caring for him at home, he had to go into the hospital. He'd taken a fall. And during that time, my family did an intervention on me and said, he needs to go into a home. You can't care for him at home anymore because of what it's doing to you. So I looked around, and I went to 30 different facilities to see if I could, to educate myself and to see, because as Diane said, it's one of the most difficult decisions you face. And I wound up with an excellent, excellent nursing home. But what I saw when I toured the Pines yesterday just blew me away, because the Pines is not just bricks and mortar. I saw and felt heart and soul. And I wish I'd been able to give that to my husband. I couldn't. We gave him excellent care. But the heart and soul that I felt was not there. And I think the fact of the Children's Center, I used to breed chocolate labs, and my husband and I loved doing the chocolate lab thing. He was great. We'd had these puppies. Each litter had a different theme name. There was the beach litter and the Wild West litter, and he remembered the puppy names, which was great. I mean, and so I would take Maggie, our chocolate lab, to visit him at least once a day, sometimes two times a day. And the joy that that dog brought not only to my husband, but to the other residents was terrific. And when I saw the children at the Pines, I wished there had been programs like that where Garrett was. So that's pretty much my story. And it's a long story, it's a complicated story, but all of us share it.
Jenny, you wrote a poem about your experience that was published in the Washington Post, and I asked you if you would share that with us today. Are you up to it?
Yes, I can. You asked if I could get through it, and I believe I can. I wrote this, the Washington Post had a little feature called My Life as Haiku, and they ask you to give insight into your life in 100 words or less. And this is what I wrote that was published on August 8th, 2004. It's titled The Long Goodbye. He now lives in a nursing home. I live in the home we built and he loved so. He feels alone and trapped in his new residence. I feel alone and trapped in mine, a married woman with no partner. We have 28 years together. Now we are alone together. for better or worse. Better is over. This is the worst. Living in limbo, each day his illness has taken him farther from me. I miss the man I married. I honor him by remaining steadfast, even as the hole in my heart grows larger each passing day. The long goodbye.
Thank you, Jenny. Scotty, you and Suella have 5 children, and one of your sons was born healthy, but developed hydrocephalus, commonly known as water on the brain, at 7 weeks, and is now severely handicapped. And yet he's beaten the odds. How is that?
Yes, Diane, he was our second born, our oldest son, and after 7 weeks we discovered that he had hydrocephalus, and I was coaching the Montreal Canadiens at the time, and we had another girl that was a year old at the time, and it was a tough time for us because we kept him at home. He was born in June. We discovered in August that he was going to be real severely handicapped. The doctors told us that he probably couldn't be a teenager, and we kept him at home as long as we could, but through good advice from a good friend who had experienced the same thing that we had, we decided that we would place him in a home, and it was the most difficult decision that I've ever had to make in my life, because we decided in October that we couldn't keep him, but we kept him for his first Christmas, and the 26th of December 1972 was a date I'll never forget. We had to take him. He was starting to really develop a handicap, and we put him in a home, and it was in Montreal, and it was like nearly 40 years ago, but they didn't do much for him, and we decided as a family 5 years later to take another job. It was a tough decision for me because I was from Montreal. We had just won 4 Stanley Cups, but I had a better chance for a better life, and the people in Buffalo assured me that they would look after David and get him in a home. And we moved to Buffalo, and when we moved to Buffalo, Governor Rockefeller of the state of New York had passed legislation that every child was entitled to an education regardless of his handicap. And we got our son David placed in the Batavia School for the Blind. He was just turning 6. He had a wonderful stay there till he was 21. He had several surgeries. He was well looked after. He lived there, went to school, even though he was blind because of the hydrocephalus. He was institutionalized training, and at 21, we were most fortunate. We found a place for him in a group home. He's now 39. We were Skyping him until my wife got a new eye touch, and now we were able to see him on a daily or weekly basis. We go up there when we can, but he's now developed into as well as he could, and the big influence he's had on our other 4. The oldest one is, of course, 40, and the youngest, third just turned 35. They are compassionate. They're concerned about handicapped people, and he's a gifted brother, to the 2 girls and the 2 other boys. And it was just ironical. After David was we discovered that he was, handicapped. My wife, we weren't going to have another family. We had another son, and then my wife was blessed with twins, a boy and a girl. So we're fortunate as a family. We're concerned for David's longevity, but he got sick about a year ago. They brought in hospice. They warned us that he wouldn't make it, and he's never been better than he is today. It's just amazing.
Well, since the theme of this luncheon is wit and wisdom, I want to end on that note, and I want to ask each of our panelists to share with us their favorite pieces of wisdom, and I'm going to start with Duran.
Well, I'm going to share two pieces of wisdom with you. One of them, the first one actually came as a result of the making of the movie Through the Tunnel. You know, we were involved in this project for well over a year, and when it was finished and I watched it, it occurred to me that one of the messages of the movie was this. And I'm going to read it so I get it right. Bigotry of any form against any people comes at a very high price. It is a shameful waste of the human heart. The other piece of wisdom I'm going to share with you actually comes from life. And it is simple, and it is this. If you are lucky enough to fall in love and be loved in return, stay there.
Jenny?
Well, through clowning, through advertising, through television, through the checkered life that I've had, I've discovered that it's all about the moments. It's the moments. It's the moments of joy and ways to lighten up a situation. I've been practicing yoga for about 36 years now, and one of the philosophies of yoga is called the law of opposites. And what I've taken away from that is even in the blackest times of my life, the darkest, the bleakest, they can be lightened with humor. On the web, there's now the joke of the day. It's www.jokeoftheday.com. So I usually start my morning with the joke of the day and try and weave it in, see how many times a day I can use it. I happen to love, my favorite philosopher is Yogi Berra, and I also try and weave his wit and wisdom into my life. If somebody says, "What time is it?" I say, his line, "You mean now?" Or when somebody recommends a great restaurant and they tell me how terrific it is, I again quote my favorite and say, "Nobody goes there anymore, it's always crowded." And then on my way coming here, I saw a sign that I loved. There's signs all around where we can pick up humor, and this one I loved. "Ears pierced while you wait." And I said to Jim Duffy, who was driving me, I said, "Jim, what about the people who don't have time? Do they just leave their ears?" And with the last name Daly, I gravitate toward anything. Mine's spelled D-A-L-Y because we couldn't afford that I in there. But anything with the word daily, I gravitate toward. And there's a new in the market. There's a little box of daily quips. They spell it wrong, of course. But in there, as part of the wisdom, I found a quote from Maya Angelou that I really like and that I think I've been following. She says, "Life loves to be taken by the lapel and told, 'I'm with you, kid. Let's go.'"
Scotty?
From my entire life in hockey, as you people know, that it's a wonderful sport. It's played with two artificial elements, skates on your feet and a stick in your hand, which makes it unusual. And judging hockey players and making decisions was not very difficult because we used to say the head, the players that could think ahead, the players that had a good thought process, the heart because of the adversity and because the courage they have to have, and of course the feet because of their skates. And naturally, the faster skaters usually make the better players. And if you ever got somebody with two of those three, you got a good player. If you had the good fortune of having all three, you have a great player. But I had a mentor, and I used to ask him a lot of questions. I said I was inquisitive, and I was very fortunate. He was a coach. I ended up winning 9 cups, but it took me 27 seasons. He won 8 cups in 13 seasons, and I still consider him the greatest coach of all hockey. The late Toe Blake was his name. And I used to quiz him and ask him, what is the most important thing, Toe, about, I mean, we have to make decisions on players, and you always have to make decisions on people. And he gave me a card, and I've carried it. I haven't read it very much lately because I'm a consultant, and the consultant's the best job you can have in the world, because if they don't ask you any questions, you don't make any dumb answers. But I just have this card, and he said, you know, there's a lot of things that make up a good hockey player, but this is the most important. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than education, money, circumstances, failures, successes, than what other people think or say or do. It is more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, a home, a team. The remarkable thing is we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we embrace for that day. We cannot change the past. We cannot change the fact that people may act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our own attitude. I'm convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I may react to it, and so it is with you. We're all in charge of our own attitude. And you know, I've carried that card, and when we have to make a tough decision on a player, whether it was to put him on the ice or to put him in the minors or sign him, it was always, Johnny has a little more character than Jim. And that was the #1 criterion that we had when things were just about equal. And I thank you for coming here today, and it's been a wonderful experience to listen to my 2 friends right beside me. Thank you.
I'm sure you'll all agree that our panelists today embody wit and wisdom, and I am so grateful to all 3 of you for doing this. It was a total pleasure for me, and I'm sure for our audience. And thank you again to everybody who came today.